So I had to sit down with Brandon F. recently. He suggested I branch out a little bit into adjacent subjects to aviation. So, we're changing it up a bit today. What do I know about aside from airplanes? Well, as a naval history enjoyer, I think we're going to talk about ironclads today. While the tall ships of the colonial and Napoleonic era have been getting a lot of love with games like Ahoy, the iron warships of 60 years later seem to be off overlooked. From the early ironclads like Warrior to the beginning of the pre-Dreadnought warships, we're busting through the armor of ironclads. The first half of the 19th century saw naval warfare dominated by the wooden ships of old. Even though steam propulsion had been widely adopted by vessels by the 1840s, the composition of the ships had changed little for hundreds of years. Now, there were early attempts at armoring ships well before the first ironclads. In 1505, Juan de Lecanzo armored a trio of carracks with bundles of wool and stuck every gun possible on them to cover a landing force at Mers el Kabir. In the 1590s, Korean vessels known as turtle ships were used against the Japanese. These weren't meant to armor against enemy fire per se, but were more of a deterrent for boarding parties. It wasn't until the 19th century and the Industrial Revolution that armored steamships were able to materialize. While she wasn't an armored vessel, the first iron-hulled ocean-going warship was Nemesis, a steam-powered paddle frigate. She wasn't built for the Royal Navy, but the East India Company. Because of her iron construction, Nemesis was the first ship in the world to feature watertight bulkheads. 2 Forester steam engines powered a pair of paddle wheels on each side of the vessel, and she had a decent bite, with 2 32-pounder guns and 4 6-pounder guns. Now, Nemesis was a warship not owned by the Royal Navy, but a private company. In fact, she was commissioned by the East India Company's secret committee and didn't even appear on the EIC's official list of vessels. In short, she was tailor-made for operating near the Chinese coast to support EIC's opium running operations. When the First Opium War of 1839 broke out, Nemesis was sent down to China, which was seen as an opportunity for testing the ups and downs of an iron steam vessel. And she did exceedingly well. At the Battle of the First Bar, Nemesis devastated Cambridge, an old warship acquired by the Chinese. Nemesis, with support of HMS Calliope, destroyed the vessel when her ammunition magazine went up in a brilliant explosion. While Nemesis was facilitating drug deals in China, the British and French were busy drafting concepts for vessels not just composed of iron, but clad in it. The first ships we can call ironclads were floating batteries, barges lined with armor to protect an array of guns. The idea was pretty simple. Tow the batteries into position near the coast of an enemy you wanted to attack, and they would bombard the coastal defenses into submission. Eventually, the floating batteries were fitted with their own propulsion, and while they couldn't operate at sea, the newer batteries were able to position themselves and attack with greater efficiency. The French Navy's Devastation class were among the first true ironclads built to attack Russian forces in the Crimean War. While they could scarcely move at 3 knots, the 5 Devastation class ironclads were a true glimpse at the future to come. In 1855, ironclad Lava was deployed off the coast of Kinburn and bombarded Russian forces with over 900 shells fired in 4 hours, all the while taking 0 casualties from return fire. The next step, of course, was to create a true ocean-going ironclad that didn't need to be towed into action. 1859 saw the birth of Gloire, the world's first ocean-going ironclad. While she had a wooden hull, her broadsides were clad in nearly 5 inches of iron armor. The revolutionary armor design was rated to bounce shells of the British 68-pounder gun, the largest naval artillery at the time. While equipped with steam power, Gloire was also fitted with a barkentine rig, which was later upgraded to a full rig. Under steam and sail power, she could make 13 knots. The impenetrable armored vessel made wooden ships obsolete overnight, prompting the British Navy to pursue their own ironclad project. Less than a year after Gloire was pressed into service, a black silhouette slipped into the water at Bow Creek. She was HMS Warrior, the British Navy's first seagoing ironclad. Despite the vessel's unconventional composition, she was built on well-known principles applied to her wooden sisters. When she was commissioned in August 1861, Warrior was, like Gloire, nigh impenetrable by any gun she would encounter at sea. In an arms race that would rival the Cold War of the 20th century, France and Britain would launch successive ironclads, each one more advanced and more powerful than the one built before it. It's ironic that very few of these ships ended up seeing combat, and they never did end up going toe-to-toe with one another. The first ironclad versus ironclad engagement was soon to come. though it wouldn't be between European nations. Across the Atlantic, war was raging in America. After the bombardment of Fort Sumter in April 1861, President Abraham Lincoln and his administration knew that to defeat the Confederacy, the Union needed both military force on land and control of the commerce and supply routes. A central part of the Union's strategy was to prevent the South from exporting its agricultural products like cotton and importing military supplies. Depriving the Confederate economy and war effort of international trade would choke the South's ability to finance, equip, and sustain military operations. The Confederacy's first ironclad, CSS Virginia, was born out of desperation. Originally, she was USS Merrimack, a steam frigate launched in 1855 for the United States Navy. At the outbreak of the Civil War in 1861, Union forces evacuated the Gosport Naval Yard in Norfolk, Virginia. In their flight, they scuttled Merrimack to prevent her capture. However, the ship was virtually undamaged below the waterline. Confederate engineers, led by Lieutenant John M. Brooke, reconstructed the burned hulk by building a sloped casemate made of iron and oak. Armed with 10 cannons, the newly christened CSS Virginia was intended to break the Union's naval blockade of southern ports and assert Confederate power in the waters of Chesapeake Bay. An additional weapon was applied that invoked naval combat of antiquity: a ram below the waterline. In response to reports of the Confederacy's Ironclad project, the Union Navy scrambled to develop its own ironclad warship. Swedish-American engineer John Ericsson presented a radical new design: a low-profile vessel with most of its structure below the waterline, and a single revolving turret housing 2 large cannons. This turret was the first of its kind, allowing 360-degree firepower. The result was USS Monitor, a ship unlike any seen before. Launched in January 1862 and completed in just 100 days, the Monitor was considered an experimental vessel. Slow and low in the water with a flat deck and cylindrical gun turret, she earned the nickname Cheesebox on a Raft. Despite skepticism, she was rushed to Hampton Roads to counter the growing threat posed by Virginia. The turret is one of the most important innovations Monitor brought to the table. While Virginia had a superior amount of guns, Monitors could be pointed in any direction, allowing for increased versatility and a reduced crew, all in a smaller package. On March 8, 1862, the CSS Virginia steamed into Hampton Roads and wreaked havoc on the Union fleet. She quickly sank USS Cumberland by ramming her hull and setting the USS Congress ablaze. The aging wooden warships were no match for the armored Virginia. However, Virginia's assault was interrupted by nightfall and the falling tide, forcing her to withdraw and finish off the rest of the Union blockade the next day. Overnight, USS Monitor arrived after a perilous journey from New York. When dawn broke on March 9th, the two ironclads met in one of the most unique and iconic duels in naval history. For about 4 hours, Monitor and Virginia pounded each other with cannon fire at close range. Both ships' armor withstood the assault. The battle ended in a tactical draw. Neither vessel was damaged, but strategically, the Union blockade held and Virginia was denied control of the harbor. CSS Virginia was later destroyed by Confederate forces to avoid capture when Union forces advanced on Norfolk. USS Monitor served a few more months before sinking in a storm off Cape Hatteras in December 1862. Though the American Civil War was a domestic conflict, its lessons transformed naval design and strategy worldwide. The dramatic emergence of ironclads like the Monitor and Virginia forced European powers to rethink centuries of naval tradition. In the years following the American Civil War, European navies quickly began experimenting with their own turreted designs. At this time, there was no single decided way to build an ironclad, and classes of ships aside, there were no two ships that looked exactly alike. By the 1860s, the Royal Navy was engaged in a fierce internal debate between proponents of broadside ironclads like HMS Warrior and advocates of turret ships, inspired by the Monitor. One of the loudest voices for turret ships was Captain Cowper Phipps Coles, a Royal Navy officer and inventor who designed a low freeboard vessel with turrets for better offensive capabilities and a smaller target profile. Despite the Admiralty's reservations, Coles lobbied Parliament directly and was granted permission to construct a seagoing turret ship. The result was HMS Captain, designed by Coles in collaboration with shipbuilders Laird Brothers, and approved in 1866 rather reluctantly by the Admiralty. The Captain was meant to serve as a counterpoint to HMS Monarch, a more conservative turret ship built to official specifications. What set HMS Captain apart was her extremely low freeboard, only about 6 feet above the waterline. While this reduced her profile and presented a smaller target to enemy gunners, it also made her vulnerable in heavy seas. She carried a full sailing rig, a concession to long-range cruising and the Royal Navy's global responsibilities, but this added top weight, which increased the ship's center of gravity and reduced stability. Upon her commissioning in April 1870, HMS Captain joined the Channel Fleet. She was faster and more modern-looking than many of her contemporaries, and her low silhouette and turreted guns made her a symbol of innovation. However, several officers and Navy architects, including Nathaniel Barnaby, raised alarms about her stability. Tests and calculations showed that Captain had a dangerously high center of gravity and insufficient metacentric height, a key measurement in stability. Her low freeboard also meant that her gun turrets were almost unusable even in moderate seas due to flooding. Despite these concerns, HMS Captain was sent to sea. In September 1870, the Channel Fleet, including HMS Captain, was conducting exercises off Cape Finisterre on the northwest coast of Spain. On the night of September 6th, the fleet encountered a sudden gale. While most ships managed the storm, Captain fared extremely poorly. At around midnight, with sails still set and the ship heeled over in high winds, Captain took on water. Her low freeboard allowed waves to sweep over the deck and pour into open hatches. Combined with the instability caused by her heavy mast and turrets, she capsized suddenly and sank. Of the 500-man crew, only 18 survived. Among the dead were Captain Coles himself. The combination of a heavy superstructure, sailing rig, and turret armament on a low freeboard hull created a fatal design flaw. Lessons from HMS Captain would be applied to future Royal Navy ships, culminating in HMS Devastation in 1871. Devastation can be considered the first modern battleship. While she maintained a low freeboard akin to a monitor, her size and arrangement allowed for better seakeeping. She also lacked a complex mast system seen on HMS Captain, relying primarily on steam power for propulsion. Armed with 4 muzzle-loading 12-inch rifles, she was also equipped, like CSS Virginia, with a ram. At the time, armor technology was seemingly outpacing gunnery in the world of warships, and the ram was seen as a viable weapon to hit enemy vessels beneath the waterline. The so-called ram craze of the 19th century was further fueled in 1866 by the Battle of Lissa, which History of Everything covered extensively in his video. Check the description for that one, it is fantastic. I can't begin to describe how prevalent rams became. Unfortunately, they were more likely to sink a friendly ship than an enemy one. In a tragic 1893 accident, HMS Collingwood collided with HMS Victoria while on maneuvers. Collingwood's ram drove straight into the side of Victoria, prompting her to sink in mere minutes. One of the most famous Ironclad rams is one of fiction. HMS Thunderchild was a torpedo ram that was involved in... Wait, what's that flare? A green flare coming from Mars? It's getting closer. Special thanks to my Ace of Aces tier patrons. Here comes the roll. Captain Fantastic, Deuce, Ghoul, Iron, Jake Fuentes, Kodai, Private Petey, Aspen, Weefy, Boats FG, Strider1, Fox 2, and Caleb Corey. Well, while we wait for our inevitable doom from the Martians, let's take a look at some of these whack ironclads. Oh, that one's goofy looking. Oh, I like this one. France made a castle float. Oh, that's one hell of a ram. Oh, look at that rushing around, boy.